Okay, I can see that people are joining. I think we'll start now. Let me introduce myself. My name is Jim Simpson, and I'm the CEO of Zip Tech Services. We're a technology consultancy and an outsourcing company. And we run these business webinars really to share from our experience in our business what has worked for us. We want to share that with our clients and our partners. And today what we're doing is we are sharing our experience of offshoring. And I have an expert in offshoring here with me today, Charles Fenton, founder and director of Potentiam. Hi, Charles.
Thank you very much, Jim.
And in fact, we are indeed customers of yours, Charles. We use your offshoring services, so we have plenty of experience of working together over quite a long period of time. So would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and Potentiam, and then we'll get into the webinar.
Thank you very much, Jim. Pleasure to be here. Yes, I'm the founder of Potentiam. We work with mostly SMEs in helping them build their offshore teams in locations like Romania, South Africa, and India. I formerly was the founder of an energy services business where we built up a team of around 200 staff in offshore locations, and it really was the secret sauce to the success of that business.
Yeah.
So it was not surprising that we then found that this is a new business opportunity for us, and we now have 45 clients in multiple locations globally.
Yeah, and you certainly helped me understand the whole thing better, and I've learned a lot through doing it. So that's what we'll share today. So we're going to talk about a little bit about the issues, the top issues as we see it facing CEOs, and how this relates obviously to offshoring. For those of you who want to scale your business and scale it quickly, the options for scaling, particularly with the use of offshoring, the benefits, obviously, why you might do it, and they're not necessarily the benefits you would expect. That's true, isn't it, Charles? People, I think, go into it expecting something else and getting a different benefit. That's certainly my experience anyway. We'll then talk about which roles you can offshore. It's a really wide variety of roles, how to actually build those capabilities over time, and things that can go wrong, because there can be things go wrong with offshoring, and you've done this with a lot of clients, so it'd be great to hear your experience in that. And then we'll talk about the technology for offshoring, because I think technology has made it a lot easier to do this inexpensively and securely. So we'll talk briefly about that. And then some options if you want to explore it this further, and they're talking to Charles or I. So we got a busy half hour, 40 minutes. But Charles, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about these top 5 issues as you see them.
So we did a bit of a survey over the last year or so, engaging with over 200 CEOs, which is my sort of day-to-day job, and identified a number of challenges that they faced that could potentially be solved by building capabilities in offshore locations. The number one was lack of funds to deliver projects. Not surprisingly, SMEs have so much funds, they go so far. Getting access to talent. Surprisingly, so many of them were saying, well, we've got staff, really good staff, but they're wasting time doing things they shouldn't be doing. We want them to be focusing on the high value, the strategic, and the client facing. Another very consistent issue I saw was companies too dependent on non-repeatable revenue, just project income as opposed to sustained recurring income. And lastly, this constant vexed decision about should I expand capacity, but that means investment up front and any revenue behind, and the risk involved in that. And I think I'll go on to see how I think that a well-constructed, conceived, planned offshore capability can help resolve all of these.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what brought me into it and us in contact was access to talent. As we all know, it's very difficult to find all kinds of people, but IT people are very difficult to find here in the UK. And there was a shortage of them, so we needed access to talent. And we definitely had, senior people getting involved in things that they shouldn't get involved in, and really, had we got the people, we would be able to delegate that and make the best of those people, the senior people that we had here in the UK. The next thing to talk about really is scaling and the ability to scale your business. I know there's various options you have here to talk through.
So I know, Jim, you are utilising, I think, at least 2, maybe 3 of these. And
yeah.
It was interesting when I engaged with the CEOs. They're all looking at this one challenge. How do we scale? How do we do that profitably? How do we do that effectively? How do we do that without breaking the business? And actually, there's no right or wrong answer. They're often used in tandem. Outsourcing is good because it's fast. It's very flexible. Scale up, scale down. It is more expensive. But there's always room for outsourcing. We do that now, and many of our clients do it. Insourcing, of course, it's what you usually do. It's business as usual, but it can be more expensive. But it gives you greater control, greater cultural fit, greater proximity. But it can be quite slow to scale. So most clients are thinking, well, we're doing this at the moment. Well, maybe we should do something different if we're really going to move the needle. And this is where offshoring becomes an option. It's very attractive cost-wise. You can up to 70% less cost. However, it can be slow to build. There can be cultural issues. And if you do it by yourself, yes, you can have control, but there can be a lot of risks, which is why a number of businesses choose to work with a third-party, end-to-end, fully serviced HR partner like ourselves, where it's a faster setup, it's lower risk because they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and they're retaining control. It's their staff. But there's no right answer. In fact, all of these can involve offshoring to some extent.
And you're right, we at ZipTech use a mix of these. And obviously that spreads the risk and so forth as well. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to ask of the audience, or those of you who are attending today, a poll question. So there's a poll question going to come up, and I'm going to ask you, which staffing options did you or would you use? So I'm going to launch this poll now. There's a number of options, and you can click on a number of those options or just one of them. And what I'd like to, I'll give you a moment to do that. So just click on the option for what you do now or what you would do. Okay, so I'll give people just a short while longer. So we have outsourcing, we have insourcing, we have offshoring with your own people, or offshoring through a third party like Potentiam. It's a fair number of results in now, and some interesting results. Let me just now close that poll. I'm going to bring this poll to an end now. And I'm going to share the results as well. So what is really interesting, I think, here, reading through these results, 70% currently outsourcing, Charles, 50% insourcing, doing it internally, only 20% doing it offshore with their own staff, and 60%, really interesting, 60% of people are saying they are or thinking of offshoring using a third party. And that's what we do. We don't do it ourselves. Very interesting. Any comment on that, Charles?
I'm surprised that as high as 20% are doing it on their own. And I think there may be a slight misinterpretation on that. Having a contractor sitting in the Ukraine or Romania is not really offshoring, it's freelancing.
Yeah.
And that can be very challenging because you have people who are not really committed, they're not really embedded, and they tend to move to the highest payer, and they will tend to be working for multiple people. So that's not really offshoring. But having your own setup is quite an undertaking.
I think if we'd asked this question pre-COVID, I think, Charles, we would have got a very different answer. I think much more of it would have been insourced and much less outsourced or offshored. Certainly, that's what I've found. So let's talk about the benefits, because I think this is, for me, a particularly interesting slide. And I remember us going through this slide, what must be now years ago, actually. But if you could talk us through this slide, Charles.
So as I was before, in my former business, we built up a major offshore team in Romania and then India. And our main motivation was cost. Cost was the enabler. But in fact, what we found, as you can see in this McKinsey study on 1,200 companies in the sort of small to medium-sized area, is actually 5 times more value is possible over and above any cost saving. And in fact, it is that's other value, which is not immediately visible, which is the real reason for doing offshore. And I would advise any company to understand what that is, because if you understand and you can plan for that, that can make a huge difference to the success of your offshore operation.
I would certainly agree with that. My reason, I was comfortable getting into it because of the cost reduction. It gave me a, I don't know, margin of safety if something went wrong, that I was comfortable on. But and there's no doubt there is some cost reduction, and that is valuable. But my benefits came from the ones you're about to take us through now, Charles.
Yeah. So I think that first one, I remember having this conversation with you, Jim, actually, is you have some very capable people in the UK. They're specialists, they're domain experts, but I think the challenge that every small business has is they have those key staff who are doing things that they really shouldn't be doing, but they have to because the resource isn't there. Yeah. So the big opportunity for your business, as it is for many other SME businesses, is taking on very capable people earlier in your scaling journey. You will give those managers and specialists more resource to do I suppose the lower level activities, but also over time train them up to do some of the middle level activities, and so they can focus on what they're best at. And that's good for them because they're moving up the career ladder. It's good for your business because more of their value is focused on the high value, the strategic and the client facing. And we're typically seeing a 30% improvement, and that's unlocked and driven back into the business. Over and above this, there is the productivity and the work ethic of staff in places like Romania or South Africa. I think clients are often surprised at what a difference that makes. Then there is the ability to experiment. So see, the funds to build a particular capability in Romania, for example, is less than it is in the UK. So you can develop a new service or a new product more quickly with less risk. And that means a whole mindset of developing new service and products, or even the whole mindset towards globalization, is driving your business, propelling your business forward. That certainly was a big factor in my previous energy services business and our development as a global leader in what we did. It also allows you to layer on more support for customer service, sales, marketing, these are always support functions, but they thrive on the fact that you have enough capable resource, and often because they're support, they're not core. They're always underserviced, they're under-resourced. Well, you can really change the needle on that by building up a support team offshore. In fact, one of the biggest growth areas in our business has been building up that sales and marketing area for companies. And lastly, and probably right now, in the current global talent shortage that we're facing, is access to a global talent pool, not being restricted by the local geographies. It's a huge issue, especially in the technology area. And I think it was one that you experienced yourself, Jim, if I remember rightly.
That was our entry point, really, was getting access to people we just couldn't get in the UK. But we've definitely seen the productivity gain without question. Going on to the improved customer experience and retention, I have found it very hard to offer 24/7 service in the UK because people don't want to be up at 2 o'clock in the morning doing these things. Whereas using different time zones enables you to do a much extended cover across the clock. And that, had we not done that, we now support clients in probably 15 to 20 countries across the world now. We could not have done that without the offshoring giving us the ability to do this 24/7.
Yeah, very, very common. It's a big factor.
Yeah, and people expect that kind of service now, and I find it hard that engineers who are in demand in the UK don't want to do that because it's inconvenient for their lifestyles, which I understand. I get that. So almost at any price, they don't want to do that because they know they can get a really good job. They have choice of where they work. So, but it's not just technical roles can be offshored, and in fact, we've offshored a whole variety of roles now at this point. Do you want to talk us through that as well?
Yes, I think more often than not, when we engage with business leaders and CEOs, they have a particular area of their business, and they haven't necessarily thought about non-core areas or areas that don't immediately appear obvious to be, oh, well, I could do that offshore. COVID did change that somewhat.
I agree.
And I have to say, the fact that everyone was forced to work remotely meant that we thought about, actually, could this role be done remotely? Could this role be done in another location? Well, I don't mean done remotely from their home. I mean done in an office environment where you have a second hub outside your main London or UK hub.
Yeah, I remember Charles thinking, well, everybody's working in their bedrooms. It doesn't matter if their bedroom's in Romania. Well, and it is proven not to be an issue at all.
So, so the other areas in which we're finding clients can grow other functions is really anything that, as long as it doesn't need to be done in the field. Probably for us, the biggest area is the technology, the data analytics area. But the biggest growth area is in fact in areas such as finance and especially digital marketing and sales. Clients have easily been able to build teams, but like in the UK, having someone who's just located at home in the bedroom, I find long-term does not work. You need to build a team environment. You need to embed your culture in that location. You need to build collaboration, and you need to be clear on the career path. So this is where the end-to-end HR support is absolutely crucial, because ultimately what you want is high performance, high retention, and a sustainable team. And what you see on the right-hand side is an example of a career path for a finance individual. It has to be one that's well thought through, which is why the planning bit is so crucial.
I think it's a really important point. The fact that they're, offshore in a sense doesn't make any difference in some ways. They are still people with aspirations, career plans, all of that kind of thing. So you still have to take that seriously. They're not simply numbers on a spreadsheet just because they're not in your office. And I think that, in my opinion, makes a huge difference between success and failure in this area. Really massive difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
We, by the way, have people in finance, we have people in admin, we have people in marketing, and we have technical people as well in the service desk. So we probably have grown to probably about 20% of our staff now are overseas.
And that's not uncommon. In my prior business, we had almost 2/3 of the business offshore.
Yeah.
But over that time, the UK business still grew, but they were benefiting because they had this remarkable combination of capabilities. And it just also surprised me how much companies and clients are prepared to look at different locations. So looking at a technology capability in India and Bangalore, for example, but looking at sales and marketing capability in South Africa maybe looking at an analyst capability in Romania. Very rare to be in 3 different locations, but certainly in 2 different locations that serve those capabilities best is increasingly how companies are happy to operate.
Yeah, and I think your point that you made about it not reducing the UK, your company grew as you expand in the UK, as you expanded overseas. We've experienced exactly the same. So our organisation, our employment in the UK is growing, and we have had no pushback from our employees in the UK, who are very happy to move into more senior and more strategic roles, and very happy to work with the people overseas, which we do literally on a daily basis, as if they're, you know, in the UK and in the office.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can move, as long as it's done right, as long as it's planned right, they can see themselves in the UK moving up the value curve, benefiting from that.
And I think that's a very important and overlooked point. So this goes about the sort of journey that people go through, really, isn't it? So starting or thinking about the offshoring process to reaching maturity, as it were.
So it's quite a good segue to this, because I'll say the point again, it is all about this first stage. It's the think big, is what we always say. Don't just think about that one area, think about the whole business. How can this transform the business? At the very beginning, we talked about the 5 biggest issues facing CEOs. That top one, which was probably about 30% of the ones that we surveyed, is funds. Now, if you have 50% more funds because your business, your funds can stretch 50% further, then the impact on your business is extraordinary. Don't just think about the corporation, think about sales, marketing, operations, data, technology, service desk, whatever it may be. Think across the whole business. It may be you start in one area, but think big. And only if you do that, and you've certainly done that, Jim, can you then actually conceive the opportunities and possibilities.
That's one of the things that you told me, or I learned from you right at the beginning of our discussions, because I had thought of it on a tactical basis, really, and actually this has the potential, if you do it this way, to make a really strategic change to your business. And I would suggest, we haven't got time to do it in this webinar, but for those of you who are interested in that, I think it's worth having a chat with Charles, because he can share with you, which I found very useful, is the journey his previous company went on some detail. And I find that a really, really useful case study that really opened my eyes as to what was possible.
I think the other big factor I would say, obviously build your business case, but you've got to have a senior manager sponsor. It's got to have director involvement. You can't just hand it over to a manager, because they don't have the same incentive or motivation as you. You are owners of the business. You have equity in that business. So you've got to be there sponsoring it, looking over their shoulders at what's happening. And the other the number one piece of advice is you've got to incentivize the managers. What's in it for them? It's career growth. It's the opportunity to build something offshore, which they wouldn't have had if they're in the UK. It's a bonus they're going to get if they make this a success. Don't underestimate the value of that incentive, because this is going to transform your business. Therefore, you need to incentivize the change agent, which is going to make this happen. And there is a bit of change management.
You have to explain that to people, because they won't realize otherwise.
So, so the next stage then is, once you've got the planning, that planning piece, that business case is a very important bit. You're then into execution. Piloting allows you to build a scalable model, iron out all the issues, make sure you've got the right people. It may be a little bit of hiccup. You know, the first few roles you hire, maybe 1 or 2 that don't go right for one reason or another, but stick to your guns. Being clear on any processes, if it's a process role, and don't just take the process you created in the UK and layer it into the new location. Don't wait for the processes in the UK to be all aligned before doing it in the UK, in the new offshore location. Do it in the new offshore location. Bring new thinking to the new offshore location. And that would be on my other sort of number one piece of advice. make sure the process mapping, if that is necessary, is done in the new location, not the old. Then you're into rollout. I think the business case isn't just for new roles. That's where maybe the primary driver, but any business has attrition. The average stay of a junior to mid-level role is 3 years in the UK. So yeah, you might have every 3 years all those roles move. So there's an opportunity to think about attrition as well. And the other number one piece of advice is around specialization. As you scale, there are roles which will be very different. And specialization creates greater productivity, it creates greater retention, resilience. You don't have a sort of unicorn role of something doing everyone. And when that one person leaves, it leaves a huge hole, massive disruption. Scaling offshore allows you to have greater specialization early on. And that's resilience, that's capacity, that's productivity, that's career path for other people coming up. So many benefits of having that more scaled team. So eventually you can deliver all the benefits that you set out in the planning stage. And here's an example from the typical benefits in those different areas. So in the pink is the scaling opportunity, access to talent, the cost savings. In the purple, you've got access to higher skills, maybe redesigning the role, specialization of roles because you've got more scaled team. And then often clients then move into the gray area, which are the new services, new products, new ways of doing things, and they themselves bring many multiples of value.
But funny enough, that's exactly where we are. Well, we've got benefits of scaling, we've got benefits of productivity, and we're now looking at building new services, revenue, and teams around that for the future. I've had some questions in. I'm going to keep some of them to slightly later, but there's one of them that I think is relevant to where we are now. The question, Charles, is it possible to have offshore staff working in your local office hours, irrespective of what their office hours are overseas? It's a good question.
Certainly. So a nearshore location, so somewhere which is 1 hour, 2 hours difference, like say Romania and South Africa where we operate, it's very easy to do UK hours. But it has to be clearly set up in the beginning and agreed with the staff. In offshore locations like India, it can work for more junior roles. Typically for technology, it doesn't work unless they're junior, because they have leverage. They're very valuable staff. But I would also argue, well, do they have to do your hours? Because if they're that capable and they're able to operate independently, as long as there's a half-day overlap and you can have standards at the same time, there's no reason why that shouldn't work. And we see many of our clients doing that very successfully.
Okay, thank you. So let's have a look at where this can go wrong, because it can, like anything, it can go wrong. It's not a silver bullet. Do you want to take us through the things that you see people get wrong so that people can be aware of them and avoid them? And you've got 6 key points here.
It can go wrong, and it can go very wrong. Hopefully and thankfully, very rarely, but we have seen all of these. So unclear strategic vision. I have seen companies running into this, usually, and this has happened more recently with COVID and the use of freelancers, and they're sort of fallen into, oh, well, we can now build a bigger team with one guy. Fred has worked very well in Bulgaria, so we can have more people like him. So I haven't got through how is this going to work? How is it going to integrate with the team? How are we going to communicate with the UK team about this change? How are we looking at the skills? How are we looking at the career path? It's just not been clearly done. And I've seen a number of smaller, especially smaller UK businesses, which have come unstuck because of that. The incentives, if the incentive isn't there, so there has to be an end-to-end thought process about how to make it work.
I think as well here, there's an issue or an opportunity perhaps around exit, an exit valuation. I think if you have a bunch of people who are freelancers peppered across the world, I think that that is less valuable to a potential inquirer than having, like you did in your last company, having significant centres with teams in them that feel part of the company and give you all of the advantages that you talked about in that slide before, the one with the iceberg.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a massive business case opportunity if you get it right, but you need to make sure you bring your team with you, and you don't want to alienate, especially your key UK staff. They should be enthused by this, not discouraged. But that just is about effective communication, effective planning, especially on the career, especially on the HR. These are all the things, I mean, we end up advising a lot of clients on how to make that work. The next area is team and role design. It's sort of aligned to this. You've got the plan, but then again, how do you implement it? What's the team look like? What's the role design look like? Because as you scale, role design is different. It doesn't work to have the same end-to-end roles doing everything. Actually, scaling gives you the opportunity to have more specialist roles. So thinking that through and ensuring there's the right mentorship in the location. You can't have a bunch of juniors just operating by themselves. The right support framework needs to be put in place. Onboarding.
Before we leave that one, actually, I've had a question that sort of relates to it, actually, Charles. I've been asked, are there industries that have particularly have a higher tendency, and I guess this is related to role, are there industries that have a higher tendency to offshore than others? And are there any industries that you're aware of that can't offshore?
So, not surprisingly, Jim, IT and technology has a very high propensity to offshore. But it is changing. I mean, I see all sorts of businesses do this. IT where you can't do it is where there's field services. A lot of field services, it's more difficult to do it. But other than that, I think every type of business can offshore something.
No, I think you can back the field services people up with overseas admin to take that aspect of them and therefore make them more efficient. In other words, taking some of those more junior roles effectively off them.
Yes, absolutely. Let's go down to the role design and the specialization that over time creates more productivity in those key field sales guys. So they're always doing the high value. They're doing the field activities, not doing the low value. And that's a real opportunity for any business that is trying to get more productivity.
It can be as simple as organizing the diary and calendars and all the admin around booking meetings and appointments, which would one of the things we do, and that actually takes some of that, because it's time consuming, toing and froing with emails and booking things and all that kind of stuff. If they don't have to do that themselves, that it's offshore perhaps to an admin person overseas, which is some of what we do in booking meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you developing, say, one client of ours, they have design services. And that needs to be done with other clients face to face. But a lot of the prep work can be done by the juniors. And then you're also developing this junior layer, which is over time built up to be more experienced, and that can be very valuable, and then go off and do different activities across the business. So the other is onboarding. I think this is probably the most frequent one which falls down. Either the recruitment process fails to recognize cultural differences and nuances locally, the right training isn't put in place, the availability of a manager who's in the UK isn't there, the right integration hasn't been managed. So this can go very wrong, and then you're on a course for failure, not success. So planning effectively for that onboarding is really crucial. Process, I mentioned that before. You can't just transpose the UK process, and don't try and spend a lot of time working it out in the UK and then trying to do it in the new location. Actually, try and do it in the new location and actually then bring that back to the UK, and you might be surprised how many times we've had clients who said, I actually improved the process because I actually spent some time looking at it for that location, and we brought back some changes for improvement in the UK. Staff lifecycle management. We always say this is where 80% of the value of what we do in offshoring is about. It's being clear on the career trajectory, even if that's going to be quite narrow. You can still, in an offshore location, have lots of stages that will incentivize and sustain the life cycle of a role. Recognize success, have regular touch points, having maybe slightly more formalized processes than small businesses sometimes have will really help the staff lifecycle management and ensure maximum performance and maximum retention. Lastly, saboteurs. The other way of putting this is often when an offshore team reaches a certain level of maturity, you do get some people in the UK who kick back. They don't like it for one reason or another. Maybe the communication hasn't been good with them. One example of kickback is if they're responsible for the training, or even worse for the recruitment. Every reason under the sun is made for why the member of staff in Romania just aren't quite a right fit, because they don't have this, they don't have this, they don't have that. And it's a form of sabotage. It's a form of saying, well, it's not going to work. I don't want it to work. So again, you have to have a means by which to identify this and deal with it, and nip it in the bud and sort it out.
So one of the things we should talk about is the technology for offshoring, and I'm going to ask another poll question at this point. So let me just put a poll question up. So this poll question is, where do you or would you like to locate any offshore staff? And this is very relevant to this technology question. If you could then tick the box in the poll question: Eastern Europe, South Africa, India, Philippines, or other. So if you could just tick the things, the areas that you are most interested in or already have people in, that would be great. Okay, so we suddenly got a lot of answers in there. I'll give it another 20 seconds or so before I share that, because the graph's still jumping around. I think it is now more or less stabilized. So I'm going to close that poll now, and I'm going to share the results with you. So this again, interesting, Charles, 63% Eastern Europe, 38% South Africa, 13% India. I'm quite surprised that's so low. 38% Philippines. I'm actually quite surprised that's so high. And 38% other. Have you any comments on that, Charles?
It's no surprise that Eastern Europe is the highest. And those locations have a very good reputation for quality, especially in the technology and data and analytical area. They are renowned. I'm somewhat surprised South Africa is as low as 38%, because in fact, it's probably one of the easiest steps for companies to make. Culturally, it's very similar to the UK. The time zone, 1 hour in the summer, 2 hours in the winter, is very easy, but it is more distant, whereas someone like Romania is easy to get to for engaging with staff and doing training. But yeah, India, not totally surprised. I mean, I think it doesn't deserve the reputation that some have got because of their having to deal with Indian call centers, which is not representative at all. Of all of these locations, the skills, especially in the technology area, are unbeatable. I mean, the challenge you find with a location like the Philippines is you don't get the maturity in software development you get in India. So it doesn't really work in scale. Whereas India, the availability and liquidity is really something. But yeah, you
Okay.
do need to contend with the culture, which is very different.
Yeah.
And that's why you can't just have a bunch of juniors out of India. That doesn't work. The Philippines works extremely well for more sort of client-facing roles. English is very commonly spelt, very easy to understand, and it's a big offshore location for the United States. But I think increasingly time zone is going to be a problem, as especially more senior roles wish to only work in Philippines time zone, which isn't good for the UK.
That's what we find as well. So
there's the other as well. So I mean, I think
other
you
was
need to
quite high at 38%. Yes.
Locations like Egypt, Turkey, South America for the US time zone, and then you've got Vietnam, very good for technology. So there are many other locations.
Yes, now this is relevant for technology because it used to be with people overseas in different location, it was simply too expensive. The technology you needed to enable that to happen certainly was complex, cost too much, and wasn't secure. Now that has all changed. That has all changed within the last 5+ years. It is not particularly complex. The cloud enables us to do this now, and the cloud is relatively inexperienced. You can be paying as little as 20 or 50 pounds in technology costs per user overseas per month. It can be very, very low. And of course, we can make it highly, highly secure. And this goes to a question, in fact, that was asked by Bipin. He was asking the question, does offshoring have any impact on GDPR? The answer to that is not necessarily. It can do, but it depends on whether you set up the technology properly. So the solutions to this are virtual desktops. So a virtual desktop is a desktop Windows machine that is actually running on the cloud. It doesn't run on the local PC or the local device that the person overseas is using. They can see pictures of the Windows PC. It's a bit like a video streaming service. So they can still use the applications. Nothing's on their PC. We can set it so that they cannot copy anything off our system onto their PC, or indeed they cannot copy anything from their system into our system as well. In other words, they have to put it in manually with the keyboard unless we give them permission. And that protects us from cybercrime as well. And it also removes the issue of people stealing potentially personal data from GDPR. You can also put in place really strong access control. Sounds really obvious, but people don't have it. So only the accountant should get access to payroll information and stuff. All of that stuff is easy to set up, but people often don't do it, or it drifts over time. So something you need to control the access. Password security, the systems for doing password security are now excellent. We can set rules for passwords that people have to, complexity and changing it and all that kind of stuff. Multi-factor authentication, again, absolutely everybody should have that in place anyway, no matter where they are. And finally, encryption of the data, so that if somehow somebody does get it out of the system, it still won't be readable outside the system, because outside the system it will be encrypted. So really, really strong solutions and remarkably inexpensive for doing this. It's mainly about configuring these things correctly. So
I would echo that, Jim. I think that's one of the big questions we always ask. How do I know it's GDPR compliant? And a large part of that solution is the technology.
So I have a question for Daniel. Part of it's been cut off, but we're sort of on questions, I think, now. Daniel was asking, Dan Broadbury was asking, what advice do you have for avoiding the risk of not being able to find senior level talent to fill roles as you've not been training them? As you've not been training them from the beginning.
So
shall I repeat that again, Charles?
I think I got that. I mean, senior talent, whether it's in technology senior back-end developer, for example, or in a sort of digital marketing area, is always hard to find wherever you look, even offshore. But you are looking at a global pool, so you should be able to find them. It shouldn't be an issue finding them. But like in the UK, they need to be retained. They need to be working on things which are going to interest them and going to see them grow. Just because they're offshore, it doesn't mean they just accept to do just a kind of low-level development area, which is just working on the legacy product. You're going to have the same issue with them in say India or South Africa as you are going to have in the UK. In regards to training, if you're not going to provide the training direct, then there are many alternative means to train, and we have a plethora of training available through associates, and so that's not usually an issue.
Okay, thank you. So we've come to the end of this webinar. We've covered a lot of ground, and I hope what we've given you is a good overview to the potential that offshoring has in your business. I can tell you that we find it very useful. We find our association with Charles, working with Charles, very useful, and the technology allows you to be able to do that. So that's my phone popped up there. I'll get rid of that. Technology allows you to be able to do that now. If you'd like to explore this further, book a meeting with Charles. His details are there, and we'll follow this up with an email actually, so you have the details. I really think it's worthwhile having a meeting with Charles. It's a little bit like consulting in a way. It changed my opinion and my view of where I went with offshoring. So I'd recommend this conversation worth having, even if you're not sure. It's certainly worth having that conversation with Charles. If you'd like to discuss the technology for the remote and secure working, which really is phenomenally secure now and not that expensive, call me, have a chat with me. I'm very happy to share with you the kind of things that you can do to make that happen. So thank you very much indeed, Charles, and thank you all for attending this webinar. We will send out a follow-up email with those contact details, and as I say, I would encourage you to have a chat with either of us. There's no obligation whatsoever. We're both very happy to share what we've learned. Thank you very much indeed, Charles, and I'm going to say goodbye to all of the attendees.
Thank you, Jim.